Hello everyone. So this is a re-recording of the first lecture of pigs. I'll just share my screen now. Make sure that's working. Yep. Check I'm recording. Okay, so I always get excited when I get to teach you guys pig production because that is the main industry I work in as a veterinarian and also a researcher. So I know that poultry and pigs are probably the less glamorous livestock species, but hopefully in these lectures I've been able to spark your interest a little bit. And of course, if you are interested in getting any farm experience in either pigs or poultry, then don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, so we're obviously going to be focusing on pigs a bit longer than we did with poultry. So we've got 8 lectures coming. And I usually start talking about the pig industry with this slide. So this, I guess, is just to give you an idea of how the Australian pork industry is set up. So if you look in the middle of the slide, you can see we've got our different types of farms. So niche heritage breeds, which is like your Berkshire pigs. So they're the types of products that are sold at places like the boat shed. Then you've got your small family farms, which are less than 400 sows. Your vertically integrated farms, so similar to the broiler industry, we have a few big companies that own all stages of production. Some examples of that are Riverlea and Sunpork farms. So they will own the breeder, grower farms. They'll have their own feed mill and processing plant as well. In Western Australia, probably the examples would be Craig Mostyn. So they own a number of breeder and grow out farms, and also the only processing plant in WA for pigs. That's solely for pigs. There are other plants that will process pigs, but they do other species as well. And then there's everyone else. So I also put up the types of jobs that these, or the types of people that these vertically integrated farms need. So they usually employ their own vets, nutritionists, researchers, production managers, and the production managers working on these vertically integrated farms would need at least a university degree in agricultural animal science, marketing, geneticists, technical staff, and environmental managers. We then have independent feed mills. So these are feed mills that may service other farms or other species as well. So some ones in, some examples are Western Milling and Ingham. And then you can also get feed additive companies. So these are companies that provide enzymes, probiotics, all those other sort of foo-foo things that you can put in the diets to improve certain aspects. You get private nutritionists that may service a number of farms, and then also feed distribution companies. Then you also get private vet companies that may service a number of farms. So common one is Portec Veterinary Services, who I work for in Western Australia. And then drug companies, so they will be the companies providing vaccines, antibiotics, pain relief medications, etc. Then you have your research bodies and universities. In terms of the biggest research body for the pork industry at the moment is the Australasian Pork Research Institute, also known as APRIL. And then you get people in government at the state and federal level that are affiliated with the pig industry. And I've put the pork CRC in the middle there. So that is, I guess, that's a research body, but 50% of it is supported by government. So that's why that's in between research and government. And then Australian Pork Limited is the main body that represents the industry. So they do a lot of research, but they also have a lot of communication with government. And then we have genetics companies, and then all the jobs and skills associated with those supporting services around the pig industry. So it's mainly just to give you guys an idea of the opportunities that are available out there. I know a lot of you might be focused on getting into the vet degree, but I guess I've done the opposite in that I did go and do the vet degree, but now my job is more like an animal scientist and working in academia at the university, although yes, I still do work as a veterinarian part-time. Okay, so when I teach pigs, it's always the rule of 3. So this is just a bit of a fun thing just to, I guess, help you remember stuff about pigs. So when we look at their lung lobes, there's 3 on each side, and then there's a middle lobe in the center. When we look at their gestation length, it's 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. They're usually weaned at 3 weeks of age. The definitions for weaner, grower, finisher, hopefully you remember that from ANS 101. And then the fertility triangle. So when we've got issues with reproduction on farm, then we go to this fertility triangle, which we'll talk about in the lecture. Not this lecture, but a lecture down the track. And then colostrum, the 3 Qs, quantity, quality, quickly. There are 6 golden rules for managing gilts. And then our parities 3 to 6 are our best reproductive performers. And of course, it's impossible to remember all the stocking densities for pigs, but a common one is 0.3 meters squared for 30 kilos for a 30 kilo pig. So I don't know why, but it always just seems to come back to the rule of 3 with pigs. So good to keep that in mind as we go through the lectures. So let's get started with the first lecture. These are the learning objectives. So we'll just go over some terminology, which should hopefully be familiar to you from ANS 101. So a sow is a female pig that has had a litter of piglets. A gilt is a female pig that has not had a litter of piglets. So she can also be called a P0, which you might see on the sow cards on a pig farm. A first parity sow, also a P1 or a primiparous sow, is a female that is suckling her first litter of piglets or is pregnant for the second time. And a multiparous sow, which is a P2 and above, is a female pig that has had multiple litters. So just to clarify something, when a gilt is mated, she's a P0. During her pregnancy, she's a P0. When she has her first litter, she becomes a P1. Then when that sow is mated, she's still a P1 through pregnancy. When she has her second litter, that's when she becomes a P2. A boar is an entire male pig. A barrow is a castrated male pig. Progeny pigs is a term I'll use quite a lot, and they're the pigs that they're our weaners, growers, finishers, so the pigs that are intended for market, and our breeding herd. So they're the ones that stay on farm. So that's our boars, our sows, our gilts, and replacement gilts. And I guess you could argue barrows if we're using, oh no, they're vasectomized, not castrated, ignore me. Okay, so stepping onto a pig farm, some more terminology. You guys should know this from ANS 101. I just want to point out that with grower, I guess the meat or the abattoir term for a grower is a porker, and for a finisher, it's a baconer. So a grower is 30 to 60 kilos live weight. Their dressed weight, so that's taking into account about a 70% dressing weight, is 20 to 40 kilos, and a baconer is 60 to 110 kilos live weight and around 60 to 75 kilos carcass weight. So also important to point out, just because it's called a porker doesn't necessarily mean that that's used for fresh meat, and the same with the baconer. Just because it's called a baconer doesn't mean it's used to make bacon. So most of the time the pigs going through the abattoir will be baconers, and that can be used for fresh pork or for producing small goods as well. Usually the porkers coming through will be used for fresh pork. A farrow to finish unit is when pigs are bred and then grown on farm until market weight, so it covers all stages of production. A breeder unit is just where the pigs are produced on one farm and then they're transferred at weaning or slightly after weaning to another farm. And then the grow-out unit is where pigs are received at weaning or slightly after weaning. Now, similar to the broiler industry, it's quite common to get contract growers. So that's where your vertically integrated company will own the pigs, but then they reach out to someone who has facilities and staff to look after the pigs to grow them. So those contract growers don't have to pay for feed or medication or veterinary or nutritionist services. They just have to grow or they just have to look after the pigs. And they get paid for how many pigs they get to market weight. And then a closed herd is where no live pigs enter the herd. So that's obviously for biosecurity reasons. And the way that you maintain your genetics in that setup is that you breed your own replacement gilts, and then the male genetics come into the farm as semen by artificial insemination. So this is just to demonstrate the different sort of production setup. So you can have the whole shebang on one site, so farrow to finish. Or another common setup in Australia is multi-site, where you have your breeders on one site or farm and then your progeny pigs on another site or farm. And then you can even get to 3 sort of levels of multi-site production where you'll house your weaners separately. That is not so common in Australia. It's more seen in the US. And the reason farms will do that is to break any disease chains. So if you have an outbreak of a disease in your farrowing shed, for example, by having your pigs on another site, that just reduces the chances of it spreading to the other stages of production. So this is an important slide in terms of understanding the basic farm cycle for pigs. So if we start down the bottom, we have our sows getting bred. So that's either through artificial insemination or natural mating. Then they are pregnant for 115 days or 3 months, 3 weeks and 3 days. And we will talk about the type of housing they're kept in, because obviously there were some big changes there in 2017. They then go on to farrow and lactate to support their piglets, and that will be for 3 to 4 weeks, and then the piglets are weaned. When that happens, the sows return to the mating shed to be remated, and the piglets go into the progeny herd, so into the weaner housing and then grow finish housing. For the sows, it will usually take 4 to 7 days for them to come back into heat to allow them to be remated. Then the progeny pigs go off to slaughter. From our progeny pigs, we may select some breeding stock, or we could get our breeding stock from a nucleus farm. It depends on the setup. So hopefully that's nice and clear to see how we divide our farm into the breeding herd and the progeny pigs. So this slide is probably a bit dated in the data. I think it's from about 2018, but it's a pie chart demonstrating world meat production, and we've got pig meat in pink and poultry in that sort of yellowy brown colour. Hopefully you can appreciate that pigs and poultry take up a fair chunk of that pie chart. So even though the pig production is not so big in Australia, from a global point of view, it's a highly relevant industry. And when you look at places like China, the US, Canada, and lots of countries in Europe, such as Spain, France, Germany, Poland, etc., those are big pig-producing countries. And pork is the most popular protein consumed in the world. Now, the last couple of years, there's been a few events that could change what this pie chart looks like. So the first is the advent of African swine fever. So African swine fever is a virus that affects pigs. It's a very large virus. And it is quite good at evading the immune system. It's also very difficult to kill. So it's a virus that doesn't have an envelope. So you have to use very specific disinfectants to kill it. It also has an incredible ability to survive in different temperatures. So it's very heat resistant. It's virtually impossible to kill it with cold temperatures. It persists in the environment for a long time. It persists in fresh meat for 150 days. It lives in red blood cells for a year and a half. It's a real bugger of a virus. So it was originally discovered in, I think, 1909 in Kenya, and it sort of kicked around Africa for a while, and then it found its way to Eastern Europe and sort of rumbled along there for a long time. In 2018, it was found in a wild boar population in Belgium, and then there was also an outbreak in China. And over a short period of time, it had spread to all provinces in China, and then a lot of other Asian countries, including Cambodia, Vietnam, South Korea, Laos, Timor-Leste, which is obviously a very close neighbour to Australia, Indonesia, etc. So it's a nasty virus because it does kill the pigs. It causes a fever, and like a lot of viruses do, and it damages the red blood cells, so they get this hemorrhagic condition where they bleed out. So it's caused China to lose 40% of their pig herd, which is massive, and pork production in China has reduced by 30%. So at the peak of the virus, there was a lot of civil unrest because people couldn't get their pork, and essentially this virus, this recent outbreak, has killed a quarter of the world's pig population, and that's just because of how it's spread through Asia. So that has led to an increase in global pork prices because, as I said, in China, pork is and other Asian countries, pork is a very popular protein. It's similar to our chicken here. So the population in China, which is 1.4 billion, most people eat around 44 kilos per person per year of pork. So that's a whole lot of pork. And so what they've had to do is increase their imports. So before the outbreak, they were importing around 1.8 million metric tons of pork. After the outbreak and the loss that they've incurred, they've had to now start importing 3.7 million metric tons of pork. So globally, pork is in demand, so that has increased our global pork prices. Now, this virus obviously got very close to Australian borders. So in 2018 and 19, there was a bit of media coverage, but it was panic stations in the pig industry in Australia because they were really scared of the virus getting in. They identified international travellers smuggling in pig meat that they shouldn't as a main risk, as well as pork products being mailed to international students as another main risk. So they increased their efforts at the borders, and that led to them seizing 33.1 tonnes of illegal pork trying to enter our borders, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. They tested a small batch of some of the pork seized, and about half of it had evidence of African swine fever DNA. So the virus wasn't necessarily live in that meat, but there was evidence that it was there. So very, very scary. So if we eat pork that is contaminated with African swine fever, it won't have an effect on us. But if pigs eat it, then of course there's a risk there's a very big risk that they can become infected. So the event of COVID, I'm not going to call it a blessing, but it did lead to border closures, which obviously eliminated the risk of African swine fever contaminated pork products entering Australia. But there were other implications of the pandemic. So obviously, initially with the lockdowns, it reduced the number of people using restaurant services. So before March 2020, about 30% of people at any given time were having lunch or dinner outside of the home. That dropped to 16% in April, but it has recovered in August. The panic buying that occurred did lead to an increase in 20% growth of pork sales. So mince and roast pork were the most popular. The lack of international travel meant that air freight costs did increase exorbitantly for our export market, but because global pork prices are so high, I guess there wasn't a huge loss there. We are struggling with labour because we do rely on foreign labour on pig farms, and then also because of border closures, etc., there's been an increase in freight costs for feed and an increase in distribution costs. So that's mainly around moving breeder pigs or semen, and that's probably more on the East Coast than WA. Luckily, in our processing plants or our abattoirs, we have 7 pig abattoirs in the country. Only one had to shut down for a period of time because the workers were infected with COVID. So in 2020, our pork production was 419,000 tonnes in Australia. This is expected to grow by about 1% to 425,000 tonnes for 2021. Of that 419,000 tonnes, about 8% is exported, and our main export countries are Singapore, New Zealand and Hong Kong. WA is a big export state, I guess because of our proximity to the Asian countries. Saying that, you might be thinking, well, why isn't China on that list? It would be fantastic if the pork industry in Australia could export to China. We haven't cracked that yet. So setting up a trade deal like that is quite political, and we haven't been successful yet, but we are trying. Saying that, if you think of how much pork we produce and how much pork China eats, we are such a small blip to them that we really would have to find a niche market. So the Chinese production of pork was, before the ASF outbreak, was 74 million tonnes. And if you look at what we're producing, it sort of is pretty insignificant. So China will eat the amount of pork Australia produces per year in just over 2 days. So we really, I mean, one advantage we do have is that we're free from a lot of diseases, and obviously food safety is quite important for Chinese consumers. So if we can market our pork as being very clean, then you know, that might be an approach, but probably still a long way to go. In terms of local consumption, out of that 419,000 tonnes, about 58% is consumed fresh and 29% is processed into small goods like ham and bacon. Now, unlike other livestock industries, the pork industry does have to compete with imports. So the main countries that import into Australia are the US, Denmark and the Netherlands, and it's around 201,000 tonnes in total. That was for 2020. If you look at the graph on the right hand side where we've got the dates on the x-axis and the volume in tonnes, yep, on the y-axis on the left, I think, where you can see that there's been a massive drop in 2020. So that's firstly because there was a bit of sort of stockpiling in Australia because they were worried about the impact of the pandemic. So we did have a stockpile of small goods ready to go. Also, the US experienced a drop in production in around April to August 2020 because a number of workers were infected at processing plants. So that really caused a lot of chaos in the US. And also, I mean, global pork prices are very good at the moment. So I suspect those countries, the US, Denmark and the Netherlands, would be preferred to be importing into China. And there's been a big demand there. So that's why imports have dropped for Australia. So what is the current price of pig meat in Western Australia for a baconer? So it's around $3.77 a kilo. So is this good or bad? Hopefully you're thinking probably depends on the price of production or the cost of production. So this is a graph demonstrating the pig meat price trends over since 2005. So we've got our time on the x-axis. On the y-axis on the left, we have cents per kilo. So that's our baconer and porker prices. And on the y-axis is the scale for our feed prices. So just to look at the last few years, you can see in 2016-17, it was a good time to be a pork producer. the pig prices were high and feed prices were low. But what happened during this period is that everyone thought, oh, great, I'm doing really well, I'm going to expand my herd. So everyone expanded their herd pretty much at the same time. And then that meant we had an oversupply of pork, which then reduced the price. Around then, we also had a spike in feed prices because of the droughts that were experienced on the East Coast. So 2018 was a terrible year for the pork industry, one of the worst. I mean, if you look back at when we had another price drop in pig meat, you can see that the feed prices remained low as well, whereas this was the complete opposite. And this will usually happen every 5 to 7 years. But then we have recovered, so a lot of people had to exit the industry in 2018 and things have leveled out. But then we had COVID, so we had that little drop in pork prices when the initial lockdowns happened and people's purchasing patterns changed and they weren't going out to restaurants anymore. Luckily, that also coincided with feed prices going down because we've recovered from the drought, and now things are sort of leveling out again at a not so bad price. So hopefully that helps you understand the trends in the industry, in that we've got fewer farrow to finish family-owned units. So every time we get a drop in pork prices, and it's a bit of hardship for the industry, often some families will leave, and then that's creating more multi-site contract operations, more vertical integration, bigger size operations. And the pork industry has become more aware of their supply chain and where the demand is, I guess. So the graphs just demonstrate a drop in number of pig producers, but that doesn't necessarily mean a drop in the herd size. So, I mean, these are old graphs, but you can see the herd size has increased, and now we've got approximately 286,000 sows in Australia. This pie chart, it's very old, sorry, I haven't been able to find anything newer, gives you an idea of the distribution. So you can see no pigs in the Northern Territory, too hot. There's lots of feral pigs there though. But in Western Australia, there's about 14, we make up about 14% of the industry, so not huge. And hopefully by the map, you can appreciate that most of the pig farms are near where the grain is produced. So this leads to me explaining how to understand pig production. So as a consultant to the industry, our main goal is to reduce the cost of production while maintaining very good welfare. We'll look at cost of production first. So when we look at cost of production, we can divide that into fixed costs and variable costs. So fixed costs are a constant that you have to pay no matter the number of pigs you produce, and variable costs are a cost that will vary with the number of pigs you produce. So some examples are staff and labour, power, leasing, or the mortgage you have on the facility where you're housing the pigs, any maintenance, insurance, vet services, and the breeder herd. So even though your breeder herd remains pretty constant, you'll vary in terms of the number of progeny pigs you're producing. So your vaccinations and feed for your breeder herd is classed as a fixed cost. The variable cost is feed for your progeny pigs. I should have clarified that, sorry. Your progeny health, so that's their vaccinations and medications, and the levies. So levies include a slaughter fee that abattoir charges, and then also a levy from Australian Pork Limited, which is the main representative body for the industry. So that levy goes into research and also marketing. So the pork on your fork and she forked him ads, or not forked him, she porked him, are from those levies from APL. So fixed costs, if we want to reduce our fixed costs, the way we do that is to increase, I should start again. If we want to reduce our cost of production, we really need to do that by reducing our fixed costs. So the way that we do that is we either increase our carcass weight, so we sell more kilos per pig, or we sell more pigs, because then that cost is divided over a larger number of pigs or a larger number of kilos of meat sold, which you'll then obviously be earning more money on. So if I just try and give you an example, let's say our fixed costs for a week on a farm are $10,000. If every week we produce 100 pigs at 100 kilos live weight, that means that we would be selling them at 70 kilos because of the 70% dressing. So that's 70 times 100 gives us 7,000 kilos that we're selling per week. So what we do is we divide our 10,000 fixed costs per week over 7,000, and that gives us $1.42 per kilo of pig meat sold for fixed cost. Now, if we were to adopt one of the strategies I've mentioned below, so if we were to sell a heavier pig, so instead of selling them at 100 kilos live weight, we sold them at 140 kilos live weight. If we did 100 pigs times 100, because of the 70% dressing, we're getting paid for 100 kilos of meat. So that's $10,000. So therefore 10,000 divided by 10,000 is $1 per kilo sold in fixed cost. Versus if we sold more pigs. So let's say we sold 143 pigs at 100 kilos live weight. So therefore we're getting paid for 70 kilos. So 143 times 70 is nearly 10,000, just over. So divide 10,000 by 10,000, that works out to the same $1 per kilo sold for fixed cost. So I've put number of pigs sold in larger font because the producers have very little control over carcass weight. So that is dictated by the buyer and the consumers. So in Australia, we tend to sell our pigs at 100 kilos live weight, or 90 to 110. So carcass weights of around 70 to 75 kilos. And there's not much that is going to change that. We do have control, however, over the number of pigs that we sell, so we can produce more pigs. How do we do that? We either find efficiencies in our breeding, so we wean more pigs per mated female per year, and we find efficiencies in our progeny management. So we reduce post-weaning mortality, we reduce the number of days it takes for a pig to get to market weight, we improve our feed conversion ratios, and we improve our sort loss. So let's talk about that a bit more. So to improve our breeder productivity, there's two things that affect that, I guess, generally speaking, efficiency and capacity. So our main aim is to produce more pigs weaned per mated female per year. If we look at the efficiency side of the diagram first, to do that we need more pigs being born alive. So how do we get more pigs born alive? We get a higher number total born and less stillborns and mummies. So a stillborn is a piglet that's died during the birthing process. So it's made its way through the whole pregnancy and then died just at the end. And a mummy is a pig that has died through the pregnancy. However, not enough piglets in the litter have died, so the pregnancy has remained viable. So therefore, that piglet that died gets born as a mummified fetus. So if we can increase our total born and reduce our stillborns and mummies, that means we're going to get a higher number of pigs born alive per litter. To get them to weaning, we have to reduce our pre-weaning mortality. And we're going to talk about these in more detail in other lectures. Another way we can be more efficient is we can get more litters per mated female per year. So we don't have much control over gestation length, obviously. That's going to be 115 days. That's biology. We do have some control of the lactation length, but saying that, you don't want your lactation to be too short, because then you start to impact on pre-weaning mortality because you're not supporting the piglets. So let's say our lactation has to be 3 to 4 weeks. Then really, the only thing we have control over is the number of non-productive days a female has. So a non-productive day is a day when a sow is not pregnant or lactating. So that's obviously going to be in between when she gets weaned and then remated. So if she doesn't come into heat, or if she comes into heat and we miss it, then that is going to increase the number of non-productive days for that sow. So being really efficient with our mating will hopefully improve on that figure. Now, in terms of a goal, if you take into account 115 days gestation, 21 days lactation, 5 days to come back into heat, then per year, a sow can have 2.6 litters per year. Saying that, obviously the world's not perfect, and it's really hard to achieve that, so probably 2.3 to 2.4 is a more realistic goal. In terms of total born, our goal is equal to, our goal is 11.5 piglets or more, total born, and our goal for pre-weaning mortality is less than 10%. And ultimately, with pigs weaned per mated female per year, we're aiming for realistically 23 to 26. The ultimate goal is 30. So you guys don't really have to learn those goals. It's just if you're interested. Now, the other side of this is capacity. So that's what we have in our breeder herd in terms of females. So we want to obviously reduce our removal rate of pregnant females. So if we mate a sow and then she has a foot injury, for example, and we can't treat it, we have to euthanize her, then we've obviously lost those piglets. So that's why we want to reduce our removal rate. And then also the replacement rate is another important factor. So that plays into the parity of the sows and your parity distribution within your herd. If you have a lot of gilts or P1 sows, they're not as efficient as P3s to 6s. So if, for example, your sow management is not very good and you've lost a lot of P3, P4 sows and you've had to replace them with P0 sows, then the efficiency of your breeding herd is going to be reduced. So you want to keep your removal rate down and your replacement rate low, so you can sort of maintain a good parity distribution within your herd. And we'll talk about that in more detail in another lecture. In terms of progeny productivity, to improve that, we want to reduce our post-weaning mortality, so keep our weaners, growers, finishers healthy. We want to reduce the number of days or weeks to reach market weight. So if you are meant to be selling 100 pigs per week, if some of them are not growing as well as they should, and you can only sell 80 because the other 20 didn't get to market weight, then that's obviously going to reduce your farm efficiency. Sort loss. So sort loss is when the producer gets penalised because the carcass doesn't meet the requirements. So P2 is a measure of back fat. It's done it's done from the last rib, and you go out from the midline about 6 to 8 centimetres. We're aiming for 12 millimetres, so we like quite a lean carcass in Australia. If the back fat is much less or much higher than that, then the producer doesn't get paid the full amount for the carcass. So we said our price was $3.77. If the P2 is out, then they might only get $3 a kilo. The carcass weight is dictated by the buyer, but once again, if it's out, so if it's too light or too heavy, then they don't get the premium price for that meat. And feed conversion ratio plays into the number of weeks or days or weeks to reach market weight. In terms of how long it gets to take to get to market weight, normally pigs will be around 21 weeks of age. So once again, rule of 3. Okay, understanding pig production. So we've been through all this. Now, improving our welfare. So how do we do that? We get the environment of the pigs right, so their food, water, air, and how they're being housed, so stocking density, hygiene, etc. We care for our compromised pigs, and we understand ways to prevent and control disease. And then I've just put a couple of the legal documents there. Model Code of Practice for Pigs is the document we use. It's not legislation. It's just a reference document, and also the standards and guidelines for land transport of livestock. The standards are legislation. In terms of variable costs, we're not going to have much of an effect on levies or that's sort of dictated, but in terms of feed and getting our feed costs down, the way we do that is we reduce our feed conversion ratio or make our feed efficiency better. So we have to feed less kilos to get more gain, I guess. How do we do that? Oh, whoops, that arrow is a bit out of order. In terms of our progeny health, how do we reduce our progeny health variable costs? Well, we ensure that we don't have to give them medications like antibiotics, etc. So that's through understanding and preventing disease. We obviously don't have much control over the vaccinations. They need those. In terms of reducing our feed conversion ratio, how do we do that? Well, we get the environment right, so pigs don't have to spend energy keeping warm, or if they're too hot, they'll stop eating. We eliminate disease on the farm, so the immune system doesn't have to take up energy, because the immune system is a hungry beast if it's activated, and we get their nutrition right. So, and we'll talk about that in the nutrition lecture. So this is just a table with some data demonstrating how the immune system is a hungry beast. So if your pigs are physiologically stressed or they have a disease burden, then the immune system is going to be activated. if that happens, you can see that our feed to gain, which is our feed conversion ratio, goes up. So in this scenario, it's taking 3.3¼ kilos to get a kilo of muscle gain versus 3 kilos of feed. And when feed is 60 to 70% of your cost of production, then that's going to have a big impact on things. So just to finish, this is a table demonstrating cost of production for different countries. Australia is in the first column, so our cost of production is around $2.60 to $2.80 per kilo of pig meat. I've circled the US, Denmark, and the Netherlands because those are the countries that import to Australia, so they're our big competitors. If you look along there, you can see their cost of production is much less than us. So that's why in the supermarket, the bacon and ham that's imported is much cheaper than Australian bacon and ham, which is a challenge for the industry. So you can see that our feed prices are higher. But if you look down the table, herd feed conversion is not too bad. Feed as a percentage of cost of production is about the same. Pigs weaned per sow per year, that's where we seem to be having a few issues. So remember I said that 30 is, I guess, our ultimate goal, and you can see that Denmark and the Netherlands are pretty much nailing that, and we'll talk about why that's the case down the track. And then carcass weight, so you can see also the US has much, or the US and the Netherlands have much larger carcasses than us, and so does Denmark, so that's going to have an impact on our fixed costs, isn't it? Well, both pigs weaned per sow per year and carcass weight. So that's probably why our cost of production is higher. So just to finish on this slide, these are a few of the socio-political challenges that face the pig industry. So I'll be talking about them through the lecture series. So sow stalls, obviously, a big issue for the industry, and there were some big changes in 2017. Farrowing crates is still something that's discussed in the industry, and we'll touch on that. The use of antibiotics we'll talk about in the next lecture. Environmental degradation we don't really cover in these lecture series. Animal activists, not so much an issue during COVID times, but certainly before. And our biggest, I guess, the biggest problem or threat animal activists cause is a breach in biosecurity. So if they're going to multiple farms in a night or in a week, and you don't know the health status of the farms that they're visiting, and if they're using PPE, then obviously big risk in terms of introducing disease to farms. Industry practices like tail docking, teeth clipping, ear notching, castration, immunocastration we'll talk about. I think we talk about ractopamine, but just note in your notes, I think I've said Coles do not permit, but it's actually Coles and Woolworths don't permit it. So ractopamine is a beta agonist, which is kind of like adrenaline. So that's sometimes given to pigs in the last couple of weeks of production, and the idea is to reduce fat deposition and increase the deposition of lean protein or lean meat. So yeah, we might cover that in the last lecture as well. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Don't hesitate to contact me with any questions, and I apologize once again for the mess up with the recording, and I'm going to go rest my voice now. Okay, see ya.